the man.
We are going to die, but I believe that how we die matters. It matters not just to the person who is dying, it will matter to the loved ones who will grieve, and it will matter to the next generation, to whom we are teaching values and what it means to be part of a family and part of a larger community. I also believe that no one has to die alone. And we can make a difference so that our loved one, as they die, will not feel abandoned or emotionally distant. I want to leave you today with 3 simple but profound things that you can do to make a difference when your loved one dies. I've had the great honor and privilege of being at the bedside of more than 500 people as they died. And they taught me so much about dying, but also about living. They changed how I live. And so it's about time that I shared their lessons with you, their legacy that they want to pass on. And I feel as though all 500 are here with me today. What they taught me allowed me to help my father die, which was one of the greatest privileges of my life. My dad called me a couple years ago to tell me that it wasn't pneumonia, it was end-stage cancer that was distressing him so much. And so I closed my practice and I flew home to take care of him. I hoped that we had 3 months, but it turned out to be just 2 weeks. But it was on his timing. And in that time that we had together, we talked honestly and directly about his death. And I asked him questions like, Dad, who do you want to be with you? What do you want? What do you not want? What do you want to do before you die? Let's make that happen. It was my job to be his advocate and to be his supporter. I was there to support and make sure that his values and his wishes were followed through. So on a morning that I didn't know would be his last, I sat by his bedside and held his hand. And he reached up and yanked out the oxygen tube and said, "No more." And I knew exactly what he meant because we had gone over that scenario. And because I was there to support him, he got no argument from me. Instead, I crawled up onto his bed and I cradled him in my arms. I stroked him and I whispered to him, "Dad, I love you. It's okay to go. We'll be okay." And I held him like that for an hour as his breath got slower and more shallow. And he breathed his last breath. That was my last gift to him. And it was his last gift to me. And you'll understand why in a moment. It was his most profound gift to me. I am comfortable with death, and I'm at ease with people who are dying. In fact, it's what I'm most passionate about because I know it makes a difference. And so I lean into the experience, and I look for opportunities and ways to serve the dying. But it was not always this way. I was not always so comfortable with death and illness. I didn't know what to say or what to do around people who were dying. What I was able to do for my father, I did not do for my mother. Because when I was 13 years old, my mother had a rare illness. And in my family, as I suspect it is in many, we didn't talk about illness. And we certainly didn't talk about death and dying. And so I didn't have the language, and I had no context for what was happening in my family. I was not taught skills, and I certainly didn't have any models for what it looked like to help someone who was dying. And so one morning when she woke up and I could tell that she was really ill, I did the only thing that I knew how to do. I made her cinnamon toast. And then I took my 2 younger brothers down the road to play, thinking that my mother might be able to sleep while we were gone. And when I returned later in that afternoon, her bed was empty. There was a note from a neighbor saying that she had taken my mother to the hospital. My mother never came home. I never saw my mother again. I never got to say goodbye. I was left with guilt and regret that exaggerated my grief for years and years. I thought, I believed that I had left my mother alone, to die alone, and that her last impression of her only daughter was that I didn't care enough to be with her. I never wanted to feel that way again, and I don't want any of you to ever experience that grief. I never wanted to feel unprepared, unwilling, or unable to help another loved one at the end of their life. And so I vowed to make some meaning out of this tragedy. I vowed to find something good that I could use in my life from this. And so I took myself to school as an adult, and I studied everything I could about death and dying and grief. I earned advanced degrees, and I specialized in thanatology, which is the study of death and dying. And then I worked in hospitals and many hospices across the United States so that I could see different kinds of death and different needs. And those hundreds and hundreds of generous people taught me what mattered. They taught me what mattered to them, and that how they died did matter. And then they gave me the skills and the attitudes, the information, so that I could help others. We may not be able to change the outcome. We can't hold back death, but we can change the process. What the dying taught me will matter to you, because someone you love is going to die. And while a small percentage dies suddenly and unexpectedly, about 80% of our loved ones will die from an illness or an age-related circumstance. And that's important, because that means that you have time. You have time to learn the attitudes and the skills and the information that will make a difference. You may be afraid when you hear that your loved one is dying. You may not know what to do or what to say. You may be afraid you're going to do the wrong thing. But I'm telling you, I'm asking you, I'm encouraging you just to participate, to bring an open heart to the experience, to lean into them instead of talking to them from the doorway. Just participate. Because while you're afraid, the dying are afraid too. But would you like to know what the dying are most afraid of? It will surprise you. The research and the dying that I have spoken with tell me that it is not their imminent death that they're most afraid of. No, no. Because as illness takes our body, and as the quality of our life degenerates to such a point that it cannot be reversed, death is no longer the enemy. And the dying come to a level of acceptance. And the dying do not fear most their physical pain, because in today's age, with medicine and palliative care, comfort care medicine, and the interventions of hospice, we can alleviate physical suffering. What the dying are most afraid of is being emotionally abandoned, of not having you there with them, of no longer feeling connected to their loved ones, of no longer feeling valued. So here's what the dying have taught me. They've taught me a lot. What I want to leave you with today are 3 important things. The dying need you to listen to them. They need you to listen to that same story you may have heard 100 times. But that story is important to them because it helps them to sort through their life and to find meaning, to process their feelings, and to finish business. They need you to listen to them without judgment. Are they dying right? They need you to listen to them without assumptions, really listening to them openly so that who they are today is okay and it may be different than who they were yesterday. And listen without comparisons. And listening well means that we are comfortable with silence. We don't fill the room with chatter and things that are inconsequential now. We are just present with them. Second, the dying need you to touch them. Touch. Because at the end of life, they so often feel ugly, untouchable, undesirable. And what they really need is for you to go to them and communicate through your touch that they are still the same person you have always loved. So touch. Hold their hand, massage their back, comb her hair, stroke his arm, but touch. Because touch communicates so beyond words when we can't find the words. And third, the dying need you to give them permission to let go. They need to know from you that their death is not a failure and their death is not abandonment. So in whatever words you can find, communicate to them that you will be okay, that it's okay for them to go on. There's a ripple effect when we care and offer compassion in this way. It matters to the dying person, to those of us who are caretaking and grieving, and it matters to the next generation. That next generation and the generation and the generation will now have reduced fears about death because they'll see you near it. They'll have less myths and assumptions about it. And when it's your time to die, they will be there for you because you showed them how. I'd like to end with a story that illustrates the ripple effect of how multiple generations can come together. Recently, my mother-in-law called and told us that she was dying and there was nothing more that could be done. So we flew across the country to be with her. We asked Nana what she needed, what she wanted. Nana said that she wanted to die at home, she wanted to be surrounded by her family, and when it was her time to go, she didn't want any arguments. So we brought her home with hospice. We set her up at a bed in front of a picture window so that she could look out on her favorite garden. We called all 25 family members in from around the country. And when they were there, we each took time alone with her to listen to her stories, to what was important to her. We touched her. We cared for her. We sat up all night and stood watch over her. And after she had spoken with each one of us, she said she was ready to die. So we all came together, almost a sacred circle of silence, and stood around her, and we waited. And it wasn't too much longer. But a son-in-law was at the foot of her bed, softly playing a guitar, and a daughter at the head of her bed, humming her favorite hymn, one grandchild holding this hand, and another grandchild holding this, and we waited. And soon afterward, she took her last breath. And out from this silence, with tears streaming over our cheeks, the littlest voice from the youngest grandchild piped up and said, "You know, dying's not so bad. When it's my time to go, I hope I get to die just like Nana." So I bring to you the gifts from the dying because I believe that you can make a difference, and I know you want to. My hope for you is that in the end, that you remember the love and not the loss, and you are filled with a gratitude rather than grief. I know you can make a difference, and I trust that you will. Thank you.